For another episode of Zooming with Dan. For those that tuned in last week, we had a great chat with Mark Richardson, who's currently living with MND and has an incredible hobby of making guitars out of cigar boxes. So I certainly found that fascinating, and as did many others. And we also chatted to Ruby, who's one of MND Victoria's sensational advisors and support coordinators. Today, I guess it's a bit of an extra special Zooming with Dan. Today is a big day on the MND calendar. It's MND ALS Global Awareness Day. June 21st is the day where the International Alliance of ALS and MND associations right across the globe recognise this is Global Day of recognition of this horrible disease. MND doesn't discriminate. It knows no borders. MND is a factor in every country across the globe. Why is June 21st Global Day, you might ask? It's because it's a solstice. It's a turning point, and there's hope. There's hope that this is a turning point for research into cause, treatment, and ultimately a cure for MND. Until that day comes, us here at MND Victoria and Kayla, one of our guests tonight down at Calvary Health Care Bethlehem, we're going to be here to provide that important care, support, and assistive equipment for everyone living with MND here in Victoria. And all our sister organisations across Australia and the globe are also doing that same thing. But my two guests tonight, I have Jeff Brown, who is currently living with MND, and as you can probably tell, he certainly wears his views about the disease in plain sight. And I've also got Kaela Gomizel, who is one of the fantastic team from Calvary Health Care Bethlehem. Kayla is a speech pathologist and has many important hats, I guess she wears down there, but we'll touch on that in a tick. Kayla, in her role as a speechy, don't mind me for abbreviating that, that's what we do here, I guess specialises in all things MND and many people living with MND. And she also heads up a group called the Social Communications Group. And I am going to hand over to Kayla to talk very briefly about the speech pathologist role, which we'll go into more detail a little later on. And also the social communications group that she leads. And that is how Jeff comes into the picture. So without giving too much away, Kayla, hello.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us, Dan. So as a speech pathologist working with people with MND, I think we aim to support people to communicate as effectively as possible. And we support them with their speech, their voice, managing fatigue changes related to communication. And then we also support people's social communication as well. So that's sort of how you stay in touch with the people in your lives. What are the things that matter to you in your life that you want to continue to be able to do? And, and who are the main people in your life, both within your family, friends, and community that you want to, continue to stay in touch with. And sometimes we sort of introduce other ways that people can communicate, so it might be communicating in a slightly different way than you previously have communicated, but we sort of use social media, photo sharing, and lots of different other strategies, which we'll get into a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have Jeff. I think everyone can tell by his T-shirt that he's wearing. He's a little bit quirky. He's told me that a number of times, but I might hand over to you, Jeff, to firstly say good day and talk through your MND journey, right from that beginning of diagnosis to today, with how you're doing. So hello.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Kayla. Hi, everyone. For those who might be viewing that don't know me, I'm Jeff. Live here in Melbourne, and I was diagnosed with MND, funnily enough, on my partner's birthday in 2020, September 28. But I was showing symptoms, like a lot of people with MND, showing symptoms before that. But little things like change of voice, bit clumsy with the hands, weakness in the hands, and they increased over time. So I was made redundant from my job in July last year, and I finally had some time and motivation to go see a doctor about the changes. And after an MRI test and some other tests, they came back with some challenging news that I had MND. And surprising enough, that was actually, in some ways, it was good. It was good to finally understand what was happening. You know, I had all these different symptoms going on. So it was good to get an answer to say, you've got this. And it gave me, or it's given me something to focus on. Part of that is the t-shirts, and just trying to get the message out there at a local level about MND. But I've gone from, as I said, some subtle changes in my voice to where I am now. I know some people, people close to me, people I might walk or see on the streets, have difficulty understanding me. And what Kayla was talking about before with the communications it's very important to people like myself, where our normal means of communication may start to falter, and looking at other ways of doing that. In the, was it now 10 months or so since I was diagnosed, my progress is reasonably slow compared to some other people. And that's seeing how other people have their progression is been much faster, is sort of put my life into perspective. I have MND, but there's people with MND that were diagnosed after me are in a much worse condition or position than I am. So it sort of puts me in perspective that, like most of us, there's always someone worse off than you. And that sort of helps me keep going. I'm through Calvary Bethlehem, Calvary Health Care Bethlehem, which I think for me is only a couple of suburbs away. I've got full access to speech pathology, occupational therapy, neurologists, dietitians, physiotherapists, and through MND Victoria, Dan mentioned Ruby, who's also my consultant that I deal with, and across both organisations, I'm getting the support that I need, and I know that other people would be as well.
Yeah, it's a brilliant segue, I guess, into what I want to talk about next. And you've certainly rattled off quite a few allied health professionals, and as you know, and as all those people that have been impacted by MND in one way or another, you form this team around you to help get you through. And that team is your friends, your family, carers, but as you've touched on, it's also a wide range of allied health professionals, which I guess Calvary Health Care Bethlehem are experts in the MND space. So I wanted to talk to Kayla a little bit more about the role of a speech pathologist in the MND space. And as we know, you lose the ability with MND to do many things. You lose the ability to walk, to use your hands and arms and the like. But one of the biggest, I guess, losses that people fear and come across is the loss of their voice and their speech. Therefore, communication is so important. So I might get Kayla to talk a bit more around what you do and other fellow speeches in the MND world, because it's certainly very, very important.
Yeah, I think, I think when working with anybody, we always sort of, I guess, start with the person and talk to them about what their goals are, what it is that they want to achieve, what aspects of their life have been impacted by their communication, and how can we sort of tailor our goals to support the person with where they're at. So, initially in an initial session, it might just be getting to know each other a little bit. We were asking them about, any speech changes or voice changes they might be having, and, the social communication changes. So, have they noticed that, if they are having some communication changes, sometimes people might become a little bit more withdrawn and maybe not reaching out to their social networks as often as previously. I'm often asking people what type of technology they're using. Are they using a mobile phone? Do they have an iPad? Are they on a laptop? And asking them what are the things that they are using that equipment for. Because I think a lot of the time, especially in the day and age that we're living in now, and with COVID and things, a lot of us have adapted new ways of staying in touch with the people in our lives. So, we're using Zoom and Facebook and Messenger and WhatsApp and, other different social media tools. And those are really great ways to enable us to stay connected with the people in our lives and also the broader communities. So I know there's a lot of, in the social communication group that I run, a lot of the participants are members of different MND sort of support groups online, and they learn, they learn from each other, like other people going through MND. And then they also hear positive stories and, I guess stories of resilience and things like that. And I guess there's lots of different ways. So once we've identified, I guess the area that the person, wants some support in, then we sort of tailor the individual strategies to support their communication. So some examples might be if somebody is having some changes with their speech, we might introduce a text-to-speech app, or having them, when they're fatigued, they might, use their phone to type out a message and push a button and it speaks it out loud. We often help support people with getting set up with voice banking, which allows them to record themselves saying, some phrases, and then it creates a synthesized voice so that later on down the track, if they do lose their speech, then they can upload that voice into a communication software. And I know Jeff has sort of worked on getting that started as well. And then, I think there's also like the alternate access. So if people are losing their hand functions, we work with OTs as well, and and assist people to be able to control their computer through a head mouse or an eye gaze system, and also the social communication sides of things. I think at Bethlehem and in collaboration with MND Victoria, we're running the social communication group, which I guess provides a new, a really practical way of learning these social communication tools, and it's quite a fun group. Jeff and I did the group together a couple months ago, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But I think it's it's a really valuable opportunity for people with MND to, get together to learn from each other, but then also learn, some of the different, social communication tools, and being able to make their voice heard and take action at a broader community level of the things that are important to them.
Yep. I just thought I'd jump in. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to add them to the comment section. I'd love to inundate Kayla with some questions around this topic. Just one point I want to touch on with you, Kayla, too. As I mentioned, you're part of a team. You're part of an allied health team, and you do work hand in hand with many others. And one, I guess, obvious connection are your OTs. Last year, I had a Zooming with Dan with one of your colleagues, Kayla, Maddie Dezenko, who does a lot of work around eye gaze and the eye gaze technology. And it's certainly something I have a great interest in personally, as my dad loved utilising his eye gaze and teaching others and the like. So do you want to just quickly touch on the sort of relationship you might have with OTs and how, you work together?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, I guess the way that we sort of work in our teams is it doesn't really matter, I guess, which of us in the discipline necessarily takes the lead in this eye gaze space. Sometimes if somebody's main issue is sort of around the communication side of things, as a speech pathologist, I had Jeff into our tech room, and we showed all the different devices just for future planning so that he knew what was happening. And then, the OTs might sort of take the lead if somebody's main change is sort of, with deteriorating hand function, but maybe they're still quite verbal, unable to communicate. But we work a lot together. The OTs are experts in mounting and positioning and things like that. And so we sort of, work collaboratively to make sure that we're getting the right system, the right sort of hardware and software downloaded onto the device, thinking about where they're going to be using it, who can help them set it up, and things like that. So it's quite a collaborative sort of thing.
Yeah. No, very good. You've certainly spoken a lot about the social communications group, I should say. And for anyone that does receive the Victorian, South Australian or Tasmanian newsletter, Kayla has written a fantastic article. In that newsletter is being posted out tomorrow. So anyone does receive it, have a read. And I think for me, it was very interesting because, communications on the surface is speaking and that very basic form, but communications is so much more than that. So that's probably another good segue into coming back to Jeff. And I'm interested to hear what you personally got out of this social communications group. It had a different name back when you took part, I believe.
Yes.
But certainly still the same framework. So over to you.
Okay. Thanks again, Dan. Kayla. So it was called Photo Voice back then. And from my personal perspective, there were two things I got from it. One was the opportunity to actually meet, in some cases face to face, and others by video link, other people with MND. So it was, I can't speak for other people with MND, but I could be walking down the street and may see someone that has MND, but you wouldn't know it. And most people looking at me wouldn't know it either, unless they saw a t-shirt. So it was a chance to actually meet somebody and we share something in common, the beast. And I didn't feel as alone as I did before, and no disrespect to MND Victoria or Bethlehem, but just to actually meet somebody was a huge achievement, I guess you could say, for me. Doing the sessions made me aware of other ways of communicating. beyond the voice. You know, I initially, when I was told that I'm in MND and I should see a speech pathologist, I thought, oh, good, they're going to help me learn to tame my voice and be able to speak again. Pretty quickly I realised that was just a dream, that rather than learn to speak again, I was going to learn to speak or communicate in different ways, using different tools. As Kayla said, you know, text to speech. But interesting in those groups photos, you used to sharing photos to bring back memories of the past. And in my case, learning ways to try and re-establish lost friendships, lost relationships. You know, I used to struggle with severe depression and anxiety, and for a long time I pushed people away from me. Now I'm trying to heal some of those wounds, and maybe try and re-establish some of those relationships again where possible. And just on the depression, funnily enough, MND is freeing me from a lot of that anxiety and depression. It's amazing how things that before would throw me into the depths of anxiety, when you've been given a advice that you've got a terminal disease, or some things that used to scare the bejeebus out of you, they're not so frightening anymore. You know, I'm now, and this probably scares some people that know me. You know, I used to do some pretty silly things before, but I'm out there now. There's no holding me back anymore. So that's actually given me a bit more freedom. But yeah, the social communication, you don't realise how important it is, how much it means to you, until you realise you're going to lose it, or you're going to lose the ability to speak. And it really, that is scary. So people like Kayla and Ruby and MND Victoria and the support they've given, and the I'm trying to think of the right word, but knowing that now, okay, I might lose my voice. It certainly feels like every day, like I am losing my voice, that I'll have other ways to communicate. And I'm not so frightened anymore. I know there's the support, I know there's the technology. I just, you know, my role, my job in all this is to help these people help me. If I don't help people like Kayla or people like Dan, then they can't help me properly, and then we just fall over in a heap, and you know, we don't achieve anything. So yeah.
You've got a pretty incredible attitude, Jeff. I love some of those, you know, alternatives you talk about, you know, that if you do lose your speech, that you now have many tips and tricks to still communicate. And I love, you know, the whole sharing of photos and connecting with previous, you know, friends and family via all sorts of technology, which I guess, you know, we're lucky in a way that it's 2021 and there's many more options available to us. This group I love, and I think it's incredibly important. And I know Kayla is running a couple more in the near future and probably long term, to be honest. How about either one of you, Kayla or Jeff, just describe what a session in the social communications group might look like for anyone out there sort of just, you know, listening in and thinking, how does it work?
So we use the methodology photo voice, and the voice in that stands for the voice of the individual and the collective experience. So what we're wanting to use, what we invite you to do in the group is to take some photos and send them in related to a theme that changes each week. So we spend the first half of the session, looking at the photos and discussing about what that means. And we're talking about, there's a identity is the first theme. And so people can send in any photo that represents, a change in their identity, perhaps related to MND or not. And then we do some different activities where, we, encourage and give some different ways that people can share these photos with the people in their lives, so their family and their friends, but also with the broader community. So I guess part of it is action-based, and one of the outputs of the group that Jeff was in was they wanted, the participants wanted more opportunities to connect and meet others with MND in sort of the local community. So we're planning an MND Family and Friends Day through Bethlehem's hospital. And we're going to have a photo exhibition of all the photos that people have sent in and just have a really sort of informal pop-in session at the art gallery around here where people can come in, meet others, going through a similar situation. So the outputs of the group, it's really driven by the group itself and, what is important to the participants, what matters to them.
Yeah, very good. And I guess to join, it doesn't matter what stage of MND you're at, I imagine.
No. So we've got people, who are just having social communication changes, but, maybe they're still 100% verbal and then all the way to, people who aren't able to talk anymore and might be using their eye gaze camera to, type out their responses or an iPad. So yeah, sort of, you got access to the speech pathology team. So we'll always make sure that you can participate.
And I know you mentioned before we came on tonight that the next group, correct me if I'm wrong, but will be at the MND Victoria's offices in Canterbury. There's a question online, is the group available online for those that aren't close to Bethlehem or MND Victoria for that matter?
Yeah. So we run the group about every, a little more than once a month through Bethlehem, and you don't have to be a part of our service to join. If you're on the NDIS, we'll sort of use some of that funding. But if you're over 65, just reach out to us and we'll, get you a spot if you're interested in participating. And then we have some collaboration groups at the moment. There's one that just finished today, and there's another one in August that's starting where it's we've collaborated with MND Victoria, and we're running groups for people that live regionally. So anybody from South Australia, Tassie, or Victoria who is interested in running or in participating in the groups can, come along. You can reach out to your MND advisor and flag that you're interested. We'll add you to the wait list.
No, beautiful. And as I said to you before, and I'm sure many others say, it's a pretty good group to have the flexibility of coming together in person or online for obvious reasons. Jeff, we might come back to your shirt very quickly. There is a question online, where did it come from? So I'm going to let you answer that and maybe just talk a little bit about your unique personality. And you've touched on it already, I know, but and your dark sense of humor, as you put it.
I'm just looking at some of my notes I wrote before the meeting, what I was going to say. So my sense of humor or lack thereof, depending on how you feel about it, is helping me through this whole thing. And to answer the question about where the t-shirt came from, I found an online a company that produces t-shirts, and they can produce one-off t-shirts for about $50, including the shirt and the printing. So I've done 3 t-shirts and 1 hoodie with different messages on them. This one is the plain and simple t-shirt. I've got Club MND, the exclusive club that people are dying to join, is another favourite. And I have another one here that I'm going to share with you.
Should I be nervous?
Possibly. This is one of my latest ones. But, you know, my thinking with the t-shirts, and sorry if I've offended anyone, unfortunately, that's the reality of MND. You know, there are some fantastic people out there helping us. We know we have people like Neil Danaher finding the good fight, trying to eliminate or, you know, cure MND. But the reality is right now, there is no cure. So I guess I'm trying to just, you know, come to terms with that reality myself. And in some ways, I'm getting in people's faces with some of these t-shirts, but it's my way of, I think, starting discussions with people and just getting the realities of the situation out there. You know, those numbers on the back of the t-shirt I got from a website somewhere. Various organisations use different terms. Some say the average lifespan is 27 months. You know, 1 to 5 years is normal. But I think, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, your dad was with us for a lot longer than the average time.
Yeah, no, he lived with the disease for nearly 12 years.
Yeah. Neil Danhurst's coming on 7 years. I'm 10 months from diagnosis. You know, we know that MND affects people in different ways, and progress happens differently for different people. But I guess I'm just trying to get the message out there, and you know, people see stories of MND on TV and don't get involved personally because they assume they don't know anyone with it. But all of a sudden, there's a guy they've seen walking the dog on the beach for the last 20 years is parading around with a t-shirt saying, "Hey, I've got MND." So it sort of personalises MND for them. And yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to achieve. It's my way of getting it out there without the aid of, you know, TV or you know, social media or such, and sort of personalising it.
It's certainly unique, but I love it, and I think many others would love your approach and attitude to it, Jeff. I was just thinking that we might have to have a Zoom with Jeff from now on. I'll retire and you could host this. You speak well enough to do it. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. To finish up, I guess I just wanted to hear from you both one more time, and if there's any words of wisdom or some expertise in maybe your case, Kayla, that you can offer people living with MND. We'll start with you, Kayla, and then I think, Jeff, you'd love the last word, and I'd love you to have the last word.
Yeah, I guess, you know, just for people living with MND, you know, there's lots of support around you, both, I think, you know, with your family, friends, you know, allied health, nurses, doctors, team. You know, we're here to support you and in the things that matter the most to you. So, you know, let us know how we could do that. We'd love to be there to support you on your journey.
Love it. Jeff?
Yeah, I reinforce what Kayla says. You know, if someone's watching this later on YouTube, once Dan puts it up there, and you weren't lucky enough to see us live and ask a question, MND Victoria is there. Calvary Health Care Bethlehem is there. If you're under the age of 65, then please, if you contact MND Victoria, they'll help you link in with IS. If you're over 65, you've got Aged Care Australia doing similar things. So don't assume that the financial burden is all on you. There are support services out there to help you. I found trying to search my way through that, especially given I'm not an Australian citizen, that was a bit of a challenge, but I got there. You just have to fight through the bureaucracy to help you get there, and that takes so much pressure off you. But at a personal level, probably the most important thing for me was living in the moment, learning to live in the moment. And I have a companion that helps me do that. Her name is Willow. She has 4 legs, and every moment of every day she's living in the moment, and it just makes so much difference. It's I spoke about my mental health before, but living in the moment changes everything. You just stop and smell the flowers or smell the roses, whatever that saying is. It makes a huge difference. You just chill out, ignore all the crap that's going on around you. Even if you only do it for 5 or 10 minutes a day, it makes a huge difference. The other thing, I mentioned Willow, even if you're not sure it's the right thing to do, look at getting a pet. We got Willow during the first big lockdown and during COVID last year, and having her and needing to take her out for a walk every day, again, it helps with the social aspects. We've met new friends. She smelt so many butts down on the beach and so funny. And it just makes you so much more aware of what's good about the world and good about your own life, no matter whether you're healthy, whether you're not healthy. They make a difference, and they become a new part of the family. So I think really that's all I have to add, Dan. But I just want to thank both you, Dan, and your organisation, and Kayla and your organisation so much. Oh, there she is. She's on winter coat on. For what you do for people like me, and what you do for people like me in the future, until it's cured. As you say, while there's no cure, there's care. And I thank you both from the bottom of my heart for, 1, this opportunity, but 2, for all the support you provide.
I think you can have my job hosting this from now on, Jeff. No, in all seriousness, I thank you, Jeff, for sharing all that. And I think anyone watching could certainly sense your positive nature and it's once again incredible to hear from you and as someone living with MND, and you think it's all doom and gloom, but you certainly put a really positive spin on it, and I hope many people get something out of that. Kayla, thank you for joining me. Always great to speak to experts in the field, and as Jeff said, thank you for all you do for people living with MND. So that's probably a great place to leave it. Jeff, you look like you've got to go and attend to Willow. So on that note, thank you and good night.
Oh,
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jeff.
thanks all.